I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me, once again, as always, is Dr. Patrick Wyman. And, Stipe Miocic is the UFC heavyweight champion. One of the most inglorious usurpations of the UFC heavyweight belt I have ever seen. No discredit to Stipe Miocic, but I think the most important, the most notable thing about Fabricio Werdum's loss of the title was how weird and embarrassing it was.
And in some ways, it makes sense that Verdum would lose his title in weird and embarrassing fashion because that's kind of his MO. Like,
yeah.
For a guy who is a legitimate top 5 and probably top 3 heavyweight all time, Verdum also has 3 of the most embarrassing losses on his record of anybody. Like any fighter would be lucky to have one loss that embarrassing on his record, and Verdum has 3. He has the getting knocked out cold as a fat and out of shape top 10 heavyweight by a 6-1 debuting Junior Dos Santos in 2008. He has the awful butt scooting loss to Alistair Overeem in their rematch.
Flopgate.
And now, Flopgate. And now he has charging after Stipe Miocic 2.5 minutes into a fight and eating one backstepping right hand to go out absolutely cold. Faceplant KO. Like,
what the hell was he thinking?
Well, I think there are a couple of different ways we can look at this. I think, first and foremost, though, it's important to bear in mind, I don't think we can read too much into this. That doesn't mean that what happened before the knockout wasn't meaningful, but it was a 150-second stretch of fight before that happened. Yeah. And I think it's almost always a mistake to read too much into 150 seconds of fighting. Especially because, okay, so what do we take from this? Miocic was extremely accurate. Miocic was landing pretty much what he wanted. I think he was 20 for 31 for strikes in the fight, so well over 50%. That is absurd. But with that said, Verdum is always hittable early.
Oh yeah,
so
he's always hittable in general, but especially so in the first 3, 4, 5 minutes of the fight.
Yeah, it did not look... What happened at range in the first 2.5 minutes of that fight did not look that much different from the first 2.5 minutes of the Kane fight.
No, it was basically the same amount of... the same percentage of strikes landing with less pressure. So you could argue that it should have maybe been a little easier for Verdum to bear the shots that he was absorbing.
Yeah, one would think. But, so, I don't know. So what do you think happened, Connor? What do you think inspired him to do whatever the fuck that was?
Well, we prognosticated a little bit about this on Twitter the night of and the morning after the event. I will say it's rare. I'm often in awe watching fights, and I'm often shouting and yelling things at my TV. It's very rare that the end of a fight just has me giggling. And this was one of those times because it was such a weird way for the heavyweight title to change hands, especially because I think you and I both had pretty high expectations of Fabricio Werdum as a heavyweight champ. I think, we talked about all the factors that could go into it. There was a ton of pressure on Verdum, I think. Was this the biggest Brazilian UFC event ever?
Oh, by a long stretch, yeah. I think it was about twice the size of the previous largest crowd.
Okay, and it was their third highest gate or their third highest attendance for any event ever. Everyone was there. You know how Brazilian crowds are. They are vociferously in favor of their fighters and dead silent for everyone else, if not booing. We saw how they treated Matt Brown when he made his way to the octagon. I also kind of think, this may be a bit unfair, but I kind of get the feeling that Brazilian fans tend to love winners more than they love athletes in general. That there's a lot of fondness for fighters who are doing well and not so much... I mean, they will definitely cheer for the Brazilian in every matchup, but how much of a draw was... I don't know. How much support do you think Jose Aldo got after his loss versus how much do you think people shouted at him for how stupid he was?
Yeah, I don't know. I think without knowing the sporting culture in Brazil better, I'm not sure that I can I'm not sure that I can really weigh in on. I'm not sure that I agree, but
I can rudely generalize about like Latino American fans, like the way that like Latino boxing fans talked about Canelo Alvarez when he lost to Floyd Mayweather, for example. Really, really turned on him, like completely turned on him. Almost everyone that I talked to or heard of anyone talking to. So there are some cultures where where really it's not so much about representing your country, or it's really about representing your country. There's this heavy burden of like national pride, where if you don't comport yourself well on the national stage or as a champion, you lose a lot of stake among your own people because you embarrass them.
Well, so I would say conversely, like I think American MMA fans love a winner regardless, and have zero patience at all for a loser, but it's not a nationalistic thing. I don't think it has to be a nationalistic thing for fans to...
That's true. It definitely there's more of a national pride thing in Brazil, but with Americans, I guess we do have the same attitude. We just don't care what country the fighters are from.
Yeah, that would be more or less my take on it. Like, so bringing this back to Verdum Miocic, what did you see from Stipe early? What did you see from Verdum early before the knockout? Do you think there's anything to take from that 2.5 minute stretch?
Well, I think Verdum, he looked okay. Like we said, he's always hittable early. He seemed to focus a lot on landing kicks. Miocic adapted nicely. He started checking them and countering the kicks with straight punches, jabs. Miocic, he didn't do what I thought he would need to do to win, which is kind of close the distance a little more than that and stay in tight. Not completely inside, but in mid-range. But that's because Verdum really hadn't gotten his jab going yet. And so whether he would have paid for that or not, it remains to be seen. Miocic was landing more strikes at a higher percentage as the round went on. But nothing really... I don't know. Nothing in the fight to me presaged what happened. Because, I mean, some people said... Everyone's always very polarizing with things like this. So if I go out there and I say this is an embarrassing loss for Verdum, he threw it away or whatever, then people will say, "Oh, people have said you're taking all the credit away from Stipe Miocic." And look, I'm from Ohio. I'm very happy Stipe Miocic is the UFC heavyweight champion. For however long that lasts, I am on board, and I like Stipe as a fighter. But nothing in that fight logically led to Verdum giving Stipe Miocic the opening for the one punch he literally lands in every fight. If you watch the ending of this fight and you compare it to the ending, or at least the shot that caused the ending in Stipe's second UFC fight, which was against Phil DeFries, it's identical. And Fabricio Werdum should be so much better than Philip DeFries. So much better, but the same thing. Guy chases after him. He circles off to his right. He lands the right hand. He has, like McGregor with his own backstep cross counter, Miocic has been throwing that punch that way since his UFC debut. Without fail.
It's a totally random thing. I'm just rewatching the sequence again now for about the 17th time. and like there is nothing logically that leads from the two exchanges before that, Verdum's blitz, and then Verdum's blitz, and then the final blitz that leads to him getting knocked out. There's nothing there that makes you think like, oh, he's in trouble. He really had to do that. Like, except for maybe the fact that when he blitzed the first time, even though he got tagged with the counter, he was able to force Miocic to the fence. And he thought, oh, if I do this again, I can get him to the fence, and then I can get him into the clinch.
Maybe, but his footwork was completely off for that purpose. He just chased him along the cage, and again, like, this is a guy, for Fabricio Werdum, he gets knocked down. He's a hittable heavyweight, so it happens quite a bit. But he does have a good chin, and he's always very tough, both mentally and physically. He recovers extremely well, and gets better as the fight goes on. He got knocked down by Cain Velasquez. He got knocked down by Mark Hunt. He got knocked down by Travis Brown. He got staggered badly by Roy Nelson. He gets knocked down all the damn time. And so I don't see why anything that Stipe Miocic was doing was more dramatically, felt like more of an urge for him to end it now than any of the things that happened to him earlier in the fights. My only guess is that maybe his conditioning wasn't up to par. Like maybe there's an article here. I'm all over the place here, but there's an article from MMA Junkie. This is an interview that Fabricio did with Ben Folks of MMA Junkie. And he talks about that Alistair Overeem rematch, that awful, awful fight, one of the more embarrassing fights. Because, Pat, both you and I would agree that is a fight that had Verdum pressed his advantage, had Verdum had the confidence in his striking now that he has now then, and pressed his advantage on the feet, he probably could have won that decision.
Yeah, if he had not butt scooted, if he had just filled the time that he spent butt scooting with lightly circling at range, then he probably would have won a decision because he made it look like he was losing the fight despite landing more strikes, being the more aggressive fighter. He gave that fight away.
He didn't have any problem landing on Alistair Overeem. When he did it, Overeem was exhausted. That was Overeem, and he was a hulking mass of muscle, and he was dead tired after the first round. But he hung in there because Verdum wasn't pressing him in any real way. He was asking him to fight the fight he thought he needed to win. And Verdum told Ben Folks in this article, he says that he had an unusually long training camp. He came in overtrained. You said you recall him looking notably skinny in that fight, like he had lost a lot more weight than was ideal.
Before and after, because he was teaching a lot of classes, like a lot of jiu-jitsu classes, and I was taking a lot of classes from him at that point, and he was much, much smaller than he ever was afterward. He probably put on 15 pounds of muscle when he fought for his next fight against Roy Nelson. And he has consistently gotten bigger since then.
Yeah, and he said he came in less than optimal health, and he says, quote, "Going to the floor, it was like my way out. It was the only thing I could do. Every time I went to punch, I was so tired, I didn't know what else to do." And he goes on to talk about how that fight kind of changed his approach to training and put more of an emphasis on his striking, not being a grappler who could strike, but being a mixed martial artist, and put more emphasis on coming in good condition. And so, because all of Fabricio Werdum's embarrassing losses, the JDS loss, the Overeem rematch, and this one, the other two are both attributable to Verdum not taking his opponent seriously, or coming in bad shape, or not taking his career seriously. And so I have to wonder if that's the same thing that was at the root of this fight. That perhaps he didn't think Stipe Miocic was much of a threat. Perhaps he thought that he couldn't possibly beat him in his hometown. Perhaps he was emboldened from how many shots he was able to take in the Cain Velasquez fight, and what a huge ego boost winning that fight the way he did must have been, because he basically ended up dominating every phase. It seems like he may have come in here only nowadays, when Fabricio Werdum starts to realize that he needs to do something desperate to win the fight. Now he is a real mixed martial artist. So instead of pulling guard and flopping to his butt, he runs after you like a maniac and tries to knock you out as fast as possible. I just think it's a different way of him. It could be a different way of expressing the same internal conflict he had back in 2011.
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw this out there as another possibility here. He's 38 years old now.
Yeah, of course.
God knows how many shots he's taken over the years. Maybe the 36-year-old version of Fabricio Werdum would have eaten that right hand, thought, "Holy shit, that was a bad idea," and taken a couple of minutes to collect himself, lost the round, but then come back stronger in the second, third rounds.
To his credit, he did eat that right hand, and then he ate it a second time. It looked like the first one he ate was actually the better punch.
Yeah, it absolutely was, because Miocic was better able to plant his feet when he threw that. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think the fact that we can speculate this much and read this much into it says something about what a bizarre occurrence this was.
Yes.
Bizarre in every way. Bizarre fight. Now with all that said, do you ever see Verdum getting back to this point? Do you think he can win a title again?
Yeah, I think he could still beat a guy like Stipe Miocic. Just like I still think Jose Aldo could beat Conor McGregor. Just like I know Cain Velasquez beat Junior Dos Santos 66% of the time. Weird, one-off. This wasn't quite as bad as the Aldo fight. It wasn't like an instantaneous kind of thing where we can really draw no meaningful conclusions from it. But it was still a one-punch knockout, and Verdum's bizarre tactical decision makes it almost as strange as Aldo just getting sparked out with the first punch he tried to throw, and almost as difficult to really read anything from it. So the problem is, as you said, Verdum is 38 years old. He's very close to his 39th birthday at this point. And so, yes, one good win could get him back to the title. And if he's still in the same condition, if he can still be in the same condition he was when he beat Velasquez, he could definitely beat a guy like Miocic. But how much longer is it going to be possible to attain that kind of condition? I don't know.
Yeah, I hope for Fabricio's sake that he gets himself back up there. But it's hard to see a guy who's 38, has been through the ringer, has been smart with his career. Like Fabricio has not taken much damage for a guy who's 38, all things considered. Despite we talk about him not being a great defensive fighter, but also he's only had I think 26, 27 fights
27
over all that time.
Yep, 27
Yeah,
fights.
So as these things go, he is fairly fresh. He has taken a lot of time off from sparring and from the kinds of really, really, really hard training that wear you down and take years off your career. He may still have a little bit left in the tank, but I don't think that he'll ever win it again. I don't see him beating Dos Santos. I don't know. I think he could beat Miocic. I'm not sure that I would pick him again. I don't know that he's going to beat Alistair Overeem at this point. Like, I don't know. So that kind of sucks. But how do you see Stipe stacking up against the elite of the division?
I do like that. There's so much of a not blasé, but like what are you going to do attitude about this fight from both of us. It's like it wasn't what I wanted to see. It was okay. What can we possibly learn from it? Who knows?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's kind of weird. I thought that I would be more emotional when Fabricio eventually lost his title, given that I'd known him for a long time, and trained under him and all that, and I know all the people who trained with him, and I know that scene pretty well. I felt nothing when he got knocked out. I did not feel anything.
Now that you're a doctor, you think you're better than all of us, huh?
Well, it's not so much that. It's just I guess I have watched so many guys get sparked out over the years that I just don't have it in me to be real emotionally invested anymore.
Do you think you would have felt more if he had if it didn't feel so much like his fault that he lost?
Probably, yeah. That's a good point.
And again, okay, so let's talk about Stipe Miocic, because we've basically said a bunch of things now that will lead his more diehard fans to believe that we think he's a garbage fighter or that he didn't deserve this win or something. He was in the right place at the right time, and he landed the right shot. There is absolutely no way to take credit away from him. He, I don't think, caused Verdum outright to make the bizarre decision, but who's to say Verdum didn't come in out of shape or ill-prepared or with too much pressure on? And the best you can say for Stipe Miocic, the worst you can say is that he capitalized on the mistake the way a fighter should. And so he is now the champion.
He fought a perfect fight. The only issue from our perspective, I think, is that it was 150 seconds of a fight. There was Stipe did nothing wrong. He looked great. He was well prepared. That's the best his kicking game has ever looked for an extended period of time.
Sure, good point.
We've seen him throw kicks before. We've never seen him be that dedicated to it, be that technical with it. His jab looked great. His right hand looked great. That was the sharpest his counter right, I think, has ever looked, even if that is a punch that we know he's thrown well before.
He looked defensively aware.
Props to Stipe. No, he looked great. But it's hard to say a whole lot more than that when your sample size is 2.5 minutes.
Sure. Well, what we can do is talk about his upcoming title prospects, because basically the two guys who will most likely face him are, if he is not done at this point, Cain Velasquez, who should beat Travis Brown, and Alistair Overeem, who I think is probably the right choice and the more interesting one. Kane versus Miocic would actually be a really solid fight, but Overeem certainly deserves it at this point, riding a 4-fight win streak over top competition. So now that Stipe is the champion, who's to say they won't add him to UFC 200 or 201 to defend the title if he's in good shape? How do you think he matches up with a guy like Overeem?
Man, that's an interesting fight.
Yeah.
I think, to me, a lot of that depends on whether... I really thought that Overeem looked a step slower against Arlovski. Obviously, that wasn't enough to cause him to not win the fight. But I thought that he looked a little bit pudgy, pudgier than we've ever seen him in his career. I thought he looked a little bit slower. I think he is fast approaching the point where all of his craft... He just turned 36. I think he's fast approaching the point where all of his craft will not make up for his kind of physical decline. And we know his chin is, he's one good shot away from going out at any point in the fight. I think I would probably take Miocic on that basis, but it's a tough stylistic matchup for Miocic. Miocic, kind of a jack of all trades type of guy. I think to beat Overeem, you really need to be a dedicated pressure fighter. You need to keep a high pace. You need to be defensively sound. Miocic has a bit of that. He's got the high pace part. And Miocic is pretty defensively sound, but he's not a natural pressure fighter. So if he's kind of standing in the middle of the cage trying to fight Overeem at range, at range, I'm going to favor Overeem every time in that kind of fight.
Yeah, I talked with Bloody Elbows Michael Hutchinson about this earlier today, and he kind of like caught me off guard with the question because I hadn't looked at much footage of the two with the matchup in mind, and instinctively I ended up choosing Overeem, with the main fear, of course, being that I think Miocic is more durable than Overeem, and yes, Overeem may be slowing down a bit, but he's lucky in the fact do you think Stipe Miocic is a particularly fast heavyweight?
I think he is a plus athlete.
Sure.
I think that he is better than the baseline for the division without being a kind of a... Like, I think Junior Dos Santos is a freak. I think Alistair Overeem was pretty freakish. I don't think that Stipe belongs in the freak category.
Sure. So to me, Miocic doesn't have that kind of pressuring game that you would need to fight Overeem. He tried to do it to Junior Dos Santos, and he couldn't maintain it. I think he's better than that now, and he put pressure more efficiently on Mark Hunt, but I think Mark Hunt was probably in fairly poor shape. He's significantly slower and less mobile than a guy like Overeem, more willing to stand and trade. I think an Overeem who fights Miocic the way he fought JDS could really give Miocic problems. The question, of course, is can he do that for 5 rounds or however long he needs without getting clipped on the chin by a guy who, while I don't think is the strongest puncher in the division, is definitely a heavyweight, and so you don't want to get caught by him. The thing is in this division, because this is part of why this loss is so weird. No one's ever defended the heavyweight belt in the UFC more than twice consecutively. It's so hard to put any kind of run together here because everyone's really powerful. And at a certain point, the relationship between power and durability becomes wider and wider. You become more powerful the bigger you get, and your durability cannot catch up. And so heavyweights are easier to hurt relative to other divisions, and they are more likely to hurt each other, much more likely to hurt each other relative to other divisions. And so even though Miocic is more durable, we've seen him get knocked out. And we saw him get hurt in the Junior Dos Santos fight. And even though Overeem has been knocked out many times, he's also knocked out guys like Junior Dos Santos, who we know is insanely durable. And so it's really hard to... My gut makes me feel afraid of picking Alistair Overeem because I know he can be clipped. But Stipe Miocic can too. And Overeem definitely hits hard enough. He's probably a significantly harder puncher than Miocic. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, oh yeah. There's no question about that. It's weird because that's a fight where, in terms of the underlying process and the underlying stylistic matchup, you would pick Overeem. But at the same time, given Overeem's chin issues and Miocic being pretty dang durable, I mean, he did stand in there for 5 rounds with Junior Dos Santos. You have to think, well, okay, so we think that Overeem is probably going to land more, probably going to be the sounder fighter. But how many times does Miocic have to land for percentage-wise one of those to spark Overeem out? What's the chance of any given clean right hand on Overeem's jaw putting him down? And how many of those do you think Miocic can land, even in an unfavorable fight where he's not going to have the most opportunities to do that?
And I don't doubt that Miocic will land a few in that matchup, quite a few. He's an accurate puncher. He throws with good form, and he times his shots well and knows how to set them up. He knows how to cover distance. He knows how to fire off of the back foot with counter punches. If he was a guy who hit like Ben Rothwell or like Andrei Arlovsky or like Mark Hunt, then I would really say, yeah, he's going to clip Overeem. It doesn't matter if it's a bad style matchup. Overeem can't handle what he's packing. Well, that sounded weird. But but given the fact that Miocic is not that kind of a destructive puncher, I like Overeem.
Yeah, I would take Miocic, but obviously I think we both have some pretty serious reservations about that. What about against Kane? How would you feel about that?
I don't know. That's another thing. Heavyweight's so awful. Everyone is so old and so broken down, and everyone hits too hard. It's so hard to call anything in this goddamn division. Every time I think of Cain Velasquez these days, I close my eyes and playing projected on the insides of my eyelids is that little compilation of his little pre-fight ritual over the past 3 years where he jumps down to the ground and touches his finger to the ground and bounces back up. And it's just gotten painfully slow. He went from a guy who looked like an athletic young man to looking like someone who probably feels like Dan Henderson when he wakes up in the morning over the course of like 3 or 4 years. He's just not that same level of athlete that he was before.
Yeah. God, yeah, I just don't know. I guess I favor. This is going to sound weird, given that I was not super high on Miocic. I guess I favor him in that fight, but not by much.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think Velasquez is probably still the better wrestler.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would reserve judgment on that fight until I see what Velasquez does against Travis Brown. If he comes out and he buzzsaws Travis Brown, then I think we can say, okay, the Verdum fight was kind of an anomaly. Let's not read too much into that. And I guess then I would pick Velasquez if he comes out and looks like his old self. But if he comes out and he looks like he did against Verdum, whether win or lose, then I guess you have to take Miocic in that fight. Just has so much less tread worn off the tires, you know?
Yeah, and he's 33. Like, oh, he's so young. He's 33, man. Heavyweight is awful. It's the worst. Nothing good ever happens in this division. Everyone's too old and too hurt.
One more before we move on. Jones Miocic.
Ooh. Now that I'd be interested to see. I think people have this perception that Jones would easily run through the heavyweight division, and I think he would have a lot of tough fights there. Because I think, once again, people see this amazing talent, and they forget how much of a difference size makes. Now, granted, Jones is probably walks around at about 220, 225.
I think with the powerlifting, he's up to a pretty solid 230, 235.
He slimmed down again, though. He slimmed down for his fight. I think he was walking around at 224 or something like that.
I think that was his week of cut weight.
Okay, maybe. And he could probably afford to put on a little more weight if he wanted to at heavyweight. Probably wouldn't have to. He wouldn't have to worry about cutting either, which would be nice. But still, I think that because Jones is not a raw power kind of fighter, I think it would be more difficult for him to work his wrestling against these guys, and easier for them to wrestle him. You know what I mean?
We saw a taste of that against Ovince St. Preux, who I don't know that we necessarily thought about this at the time, but I think in terms of raw size, St. Preux might actually be the biggest guy that Jones has fought.
Yeah.
Like, I think St. Preux is a pretty legit 235, 230, 235 before he makes his cut. And how many other legit 235-pound guys have we seen Jones fight? Like, Bader is probably around that size, but he doesn't have the frame. But he doesn't have that kind of frame. He's just big and thick.
No. Whereas, like, Miocic is 6'4" and 240 pounds. He's a big.
Miocic is a legitimate 240, 245 with an 80-inch reach. He's got long arms, long legs. He has a true heavyweight's athletic frame.
Yeah. And so I really think, like, Jones himself talked about this, where in the gym he would have to, before the powerlifting, he felt like he would really have to worry about getting sprawled on and stuff like that when he was sparring other big guys, and then he felt like he had more confidence and more power to drive through, but it didn't look that way when he fought OSP. He had a really big athletic dude in front of him, one significantly less skilled than a guy like Stipe Miocic, and he looked really shy about mixing it up. And so I have to wonder. I think it will be a much closer fight than people think. I would have to favor Jones, but I think it would be a pretty tough fight for both guys.
Yeah, I'm with that. Well, so with all that under our belts, should we move on to our next segment?
Let's do it. Let's take a quick break. We've talked and wondered and scratched our heads for about 28 minutes now, so let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the other interesting fights from this card. We have Cyborg Justino now, right?
Justino now.
Cristiane Cyborg Justino wrecked Leslie Smith. We had Brian Barberena did his thing against Worley Alves. Lots of other interesting things. So when we come back, we'll talk about that and more. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Okay, as promised, a few more fights from UFC 198 to discuss. First up, Cyborg Santos, Leslie Smith. Was anyone surprised that Cyborg beat Leslie Smith?
Do you mean, when you say Cyborg, I assume you mean best female fighter on the planet, Cyborg?
Do you remember a time, Pat, when people would be like taken aback when you would suggest that Cyborg would beat Ronda Rousey?
I do, and now it seems like that's actually the conventional wisdom.
Yeah, do you think there are many people in the MMA bubble who would disagree with that today?
I don't know. It's been interesting kind of perusing comment sections and the Twitterverse since Cyborg just beat 7 shades of shit out of Leslie Smith. Beat her like the rented mule of a redheaded stepchild. It's been interesting kind of perusing the what people have to say about it. It seems like a lot of the vitriol that used to exist for Cyborg is kind of gone now. I mean, I'm sure it's still out there among a particular segment of knuckle draggers.
But now you get like cheeky comments about her being a man mixed in with a lot of fondness for her personality and her fighting style. So, it's more positive than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that the big thing that seems to be coalescing after this particular fight, now that a lot more people have had the chance to actually see her do her thing, is I think the reason that tide has turned so drastically is because they realize that she is not just a physical specimen. Like, even though she is, she's a tremendous athlete. She's tremendously strong. She has special power, not just for a featherweight, not leaving aside gender. She is a special, like one of a kind of puncher too. I mean, just in terms of the way that she's put together.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that too is because we want to talk about her technical prowess, and that she's not just a physical talent. I think the power is also part of her technical prowess because Cyborg has significantly better punching mechanics than the average female mixed martial artist. I have heard that it is actually, I've read that it's actually significantly more difficult for women to punch, to incorporate the same kind of kinetic chain into their punches that men seem to grab pretty naturally. Just the different way that our hips and our legs are built. And if you compare the way that Cyborg punched to, for example, Leslie Smith, look at the way Leslie Smith throws her punches. There's not a ton of involvement between her lower and upper body. Look at Holly Holm, who is one of the best strikers in the women's divisions, in women's MMA right now. Holly Holm doesn't seem to know how to involve her hips and her legs into her punches. Look at Ronda Rousey, who carries natural power. Horrible punching mechanics. If you watch Ronda Rousey training, her legs are doing something completely separate from her upper body. And you cannot say that about Cyborg. She is distinct among the majority of female fighters in that she really has a knack for getting her whole body into her punches without having to be like all super athletic and fling herself around like a guy like OSP does.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit before about the difference between athletic power and kind of natural snapping power. And how the most special punchers out there have both. And Cyborg has both.
Sure.
So like Anthony Johnson has both. He both throws really hard. He's got the athlete power, but he also has a kind of a natural snap to his shots. I think Cyborg is one of the very few female fighters who has both of those kinds of power. Like, it seems to be an even rarer attribute among women than it is among men. But so, to come back to the point, it's like she has these incredible physical gifts, but she also has really sound fundamentals in terms of weight transfer, getting her hips over, getting her body weight behind her shots. But then, just in terms of technical skill, she is miles beyond. Her competition in a variety of ways. But like, she's also a kind of a really rare type of fighter, especially in women's MMA. She's an aggressive counterpuncher. Yeah. We've talked before about that's not a terribly common type.
No. I think it's becoming more common in MMA, and we've got quite a few good pressure fighters who rely on their counters in boxing. But in MMA, it's still kind of a new thing, where you can have an aggressive fighter who isn't reckless, who isn't over-aggressive, and not like a Chris Lieben, just trying to push the pace and not caring if they get hit. And you can have a person who likes to counterpunch, who isn't a Lyoto Machida or an Anderson Silva, who likes to hang back and make you come to them. And Cyborg combines the strong points of both of those games very, very well.
Yeah, it's a rare. You don't see it all that much in women's MMA. As far as I can think of, she is the only aggressive counterpuncher fighting at a high level in women's MMA.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of another. Jędrzejczyk is a pretty good counterpuncher.
Yeah, but she doesn't straight up pressure all that much.
Well, depends who she's fighting. She didn't in her last fight, but she did against Penne.
If she thinks she can bully you, she will.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But at any rate, it's a rare combination of skills. Yeah, it's a rare combination of skills, and it's especially rare when you marry that kind of technical acumen to those kinds of physical gifts. Like in the pocket, Cyborg is terrifying, and she's technically sound. The way she pulls her head off the center line as she throws. She mixes her shots between head and body. She has great balance on her combination. She doesn't throw herself off balance as she throws.
Yeah.
So she can go 4 or 5 punches in a row while still staying defensively sound, while still keeping her hands in good defensive position. She can go kicks to punches and punches to kicks. Those are all options. It's a very, the best comparison for her, I think, is Anthony Johnson. I think they're very similar fighters in their approach, their power, their combination of physical gifts and technical skill.
Yeah, in style, she reminds me a little bit of a guy like Patricky Pitbull, or like either of the Freire brothers, with the kind of the Brazilian Muay Thai style, but both of those guys have become more disciplined over time as well. And that, I think, is that's the biggest thing in Cyborg's favor right now. She used to be like a Vanderlei Silva type, where she would just go bananas and try to destroy you as quickly as possible. If you look at, for example, and she was still very effective doing that, by the way. The fact that she could fight really recklessly back in the day and still be successful says a lot about her natural ability. Like when she fought Gina Carano, she just kind of ran her over. She actually got herself in a lot of bad positions against Gina Carano. And Carano just couldn't compete with her physically. But now Cyborg is a very measured fighter. If you watch this Smith fight, I mean, she had a girl in Smith who she probably could have just outmuscled. Even though Smith came in bigger for this fight and everything, Smith is a 135er, and Cyborg struggled hard to make that 140-pound weight limit. And still, she went out there and fought a very poised, very meticulous fight. As you said, she was very balanced. She put her shots together really well. She mixed up her targets. She even would stick her jab out there after she attacked with her rear hand or her rear leg to make sure that Smith couldn't come back after her, because she knows Smith likes to swarm and engage in a kind of a dogfight. She just went out there and picked Leslie Smith apart, but with crushing power. And there's not many other fighters who can do that.
Yeah, I mean, the willingness to stay in the pocket, but to stay sound in the pocket. Like, you notice she always pulled her hands back to her head after she threw.
Yeah.
Always pulled back into a guard. Always moved her head. She moved her head consistently at range, measured with her jab. Like, that is a tough combination for anybody to deal with. I don't, in terms of anybody in that division, I think that Holm is probably the most difficult matchup for her on paper. But Holm would have to avoid that crushing power for 5 rounds. That's the really difficult thing about that matchup, about that kind of matchup, is not only do you have to stay sound and stay technical the whole time against a much better pressure, against a much more technical, much sounder pressure fighter than Ronda Rousey, who was a swarmer who just wanted to bull rush. Like, Cyborg knows how to cut you off. She knows how to use her jab. She knows how to use her feet. She knows how to use kicks to attack space, to attack the space that you're trying to move into. That's a kind of a tough matchup for Holm too. Like,
she doesn't mind being put in a bad spot either. Like, she's tough enough mentally to fight out of that. Like I said, she ended up in some difficult positions in that Gina Carano fight. Granted, Carano couldn't outwork her, but in her last fight with Daria Ibragimova, she got held against the fence in a single leg position for 4 minutes and 50 seconds and got the knockout at 4 minutes and 58 seconds. But she was okay being held there and being pinned. She didn't start freaking out because she couldn't have the striking range that she wanted. She was being controlled, but she wasn't nervous about it. That's a really big thing for Cyborg, is that she always feels like she's in control of a fight, or that she's in control of herself, even when things aren't necessarily going exactly how she would want them to. So she has the appearance of having physical dominance, even when she's not dominating every aspect of the matchup.
Yeah, it's a very calm, very, I like the way that you talked about her as measured, because she is at this point. And, I don't know that there is a single fighter who competes at 135, 145 pounds inside, outside the UFC that I would pick over her.
No, I don't think so. I think the Holm fight could be very interesting.
Yeah.
Holm could definitely, Holm's fought some much bigger, harder hitters before in boxing and managed to keep them at bay and outpoint them. So that's possible.
Yeah, it would be a fight that I would want to see. I would be very interested in seeing.
If Holm won, it would almost certainly be not a very exciting fight, but the excitement would be in figuring out whether Cyborg could have the exciting fight she wanted or whether Holm could take the fight out of it.
Mm-hmm. This is true. Well, so what else stood out to you on this card? What other fights really stood out? I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say here.
Are we both out of it a little bit today, Pat?
Dude, so this is I technically graduated last week, right?
Yeah.
But I'm turning in the final round of my revisions on my dissertation this week.
Yeah.
So I wrote straight through for 11 hours yesterday. I wrote straight through for 6 hours before we started recording today. Like, I am fucking exhausted mentally. I'm so tired.
Yeah, I feel you. And I'm moving. We're both a little busy right now. But good news is at some point soon we should be able to find more time to do like live casts and like special recorded episodes and stuff like that when we both have a little more time in our schedules.
This is very true.
It'd be nice. Where were we?
Orly Alves, Brian Barberena.
Okay. Brian Barberena is my number one favorite fighter now in all of MMA. He is exactly the kind of fighter that I tend to go for. And he was so good against Orly Alves. Really, the story of this fight was, is Orly Alves, how did you put it? Who did you compare him to the other day? You said you thought he was.
Well, the question is whether he was going to be Jacare or whether he was going to be Eric Silva.
And
right? Because
maybe Eric Silva.
Yeah, they're both ex-gym. The reason I made this comparison is because all three of them are ex-gym fighters. They all train. They have all spent a lot of time training together. Silva has spent time at Team Nogueira, he spent time at Kings, but he is fundamentally an ex-gym fighter.
Yeah.
They all have a really slick. Nobody as slick as Jacare, but slick technical grappling games, especially in transition.
Yeah.
Especially from the front headlock. Surprisingly good technical wrestlers. But more than anything, hyper athletic.
Yeah.
Hyper athletic dudes who throw really, really hard on the feet, but who don't have great gas tanks. So the question is whether Alves was going to evolve to the point where he could mask those deficiencies and maximize the best parts of that kind of game, which is what Jacare has done, or whether he was going to fall prey to his athleticism and lack of cardio and fall in love with flashy shit and be Eric Silva. And it seems like in this fight, he was the latter.
Well, he had the same struggle when he fought Alan Jouban. He came out, he hurt Jouban early, very similar to this fight. Because for me, when I was watching, I looked away and I came back into the room 20 seconds into the first round. I'm like, oh, Barberena's in a guillotine. Same kind of thing. Alves has his opponent in a lot of trouble really early on. Same thing happened in the Jouban fight. He had Jouban badly hurt. I think it may have been a body kick. No, Jouban hurt him with a body kick. I think he stunned him with a head kick or with a punch upstairs. And he had Jouban going all over the place on skates, and he went nuts trying to finish him. And if you know anything, if you have done any research on guys like Alan Jouban and Brian Barberena, you know that it is a very risky proposition to fight a wild, aggressive fight with them. You feed their energy. Basically, Orly Alves has these two guys who feed off of aggressive energy and come back strong, and he made both fights as difficult as they could possibly be by just trying to swarm them and going crazy early. And now, if he had fought Jouban the way he fought like Marcio Alexandre Jr., measured outside kicking game and reactive takedowns and stuff like that, he could have kept Barberena from building his pace and kept him from taking over as the fight went on. But he didn't. He went out there and tried to crazy out-athlete him. And Barberena is not the athlete that Orly Alves is. He doesn't have that speed or that explosiveness or that power, but he's extremely game. And I love game fighters. More than anything, I love watching a guy who is just willing to, not even a stand-and-trade guy. Barberena is not a dumb fighter. I just love a guy who is willing to create opportunities no matter what kind of looks you're giving him.
Well, he's super durable and he's super crafty and he knows how to do the little things right. And I think that's the difference between Jacare and Eric Silva and at this point Orly Alves. Though Alves is still really young, he has a lot of time to fix these kinds of issues in a way that at this point a guy like Eric Silva just doesn't. Silva is who he is at this point. That is not true of Alves. Alves is like 5 years into his career, and I think he's 20. I think he's 24, 25, maybe 26. Like, he still has time to figure these things out. The difference between those guys and Jacare is that Jacare, despite his athleticism, despite his ability to physically overpower most of his opposition, learned how to do the little things right. He learned how to use head pressure in the clinch. He learned balance. He learned how to grind things out. He learned how to be measured in a way that Silva never did. Yeah. And so the question is Alves going to just be content to go out there and blow the doors off of guys he can blow the doors off of, or is he going to learn to do things like this? Like, to me, the story of this fight was the difference in technical acumen in the clinch. You know,
sure.
Like, so did you see the way that Alves, when he got in there with Barberena, thought that he could just be stronger and pin him there?
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to use head pressure.
He didn't know how to control Barberena's head. Whereas Barberena was in there framing, he was in there using head position, he was creating space and then filling it with short strikes. And the same things even happened at range. You know, like Barberena was hittable, so and he's tough, and so he knows he can rely on that. But we're constantly in positions where Alves is like, I'm the faster guy, I can leap in and hit him, and he got countered a ton. Barberena's right hook, his kicks and things like that, he just kept running into stuff because he was so confident in, I can land this, I can make this thing happen. Wasn't aware of how to fit all of that confidence in his athletic ability into a coherent game plan.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, to me, that difference in the clinch encapsulated what is right and what is wrong with both guys in this fight. Like, Barberena is a guy who has never been able to take shortcuts in his career. And Alves and Silva and Jacare earlier were guys who could afford to take those shortcuts because they had the natural gifts to make up for them. But like, if Alves in a division as deep as welterweight is going to try to cruise on that kind of physicality, like we saw where he ends up, we saw where the line is. You know, as we've seen with Eric Silva many, many times over the years. Yeah,
I like the narratives of fights like this because it's and not that like guys who are hard workers who don't have that kind of crazy natural explosiveness and everything. Or they represent me in any way. I sure as hell don't have their work ethic, so they still have some things that make them better than me at doing this. But I like seeing the conflict between preparedness and hard work and athletic ability, because obviously we tend to pick prospects based on how freakishly athletic they are. And I like the fact that there is a role for guys like Bryan Barberena, who will almost certainly never get his way to the welterweight title. Whether he goes back down to lightweight or sticks at welterweight, he has the misfortune of being in the two deepest divisions in the sport. But I like that there's a place for a guy like him to ply his trade and show the value of all of the experience and all the hard work he has put in and the intelligent coaching and training he gets with John Crouch and Ben Henderson, and how valuable that really can be against a guy like Warlley Alves, who goes in there expecting to use his athleticism to win.
So it's funny. Like, I enjoy guys like Bryan Barberena too. I'm a big fan. Like Mike Pyle is one of my very favorite fighters for exactly that reason. But at the end of the day, if I think about what I want to see, I want to see guys like Warlley Alves who have those kinds of physical gifts, but who also know how to do the little shit right. Like, I want to see the guys who maximize. I want to see the guys with freakish gifts who maximize those gifts through work ethic and through being properly trained. Like that's why George St. Pierre is my favorite fighter ever.
Sure. Yeah.
And Jose Aldo too. Like, the guys who have all the gifts, but who also have all the training. Like, because I want to see the very best possible thing that we can possibly see, and that's the best possible thing that we can see is the combination of skill and athleticism. Yeah.
Well, speaking of people winning fights despite the athletic balance not tilting in their favor, in their favor. How about Little Nog knocking out Patrick Cummins?
Man, that was awesome.
It was amazing. It was. I was kicking myself for not having picked him, but I was still not at all unhappy to have been wrong, because there are few things I love more in combat sports than an old veteran getting a win over a younger, stronger, and more promising fighter. I love it. I love old like really old veterans. I'm not talking like a guy like Barberena, who's not old, but like a guy in that position who has settled into his role as a gatekeeper. I'm not talking about, I don't know. Who's a fighter who fits that bill?
You're not talking about the Ryan Baders of the world. You're talking about you're talking about the really old motherfuckers. You're talking about the 39-year-olds.
Yeah, I'm talking about past their prime fighters. I'm talking about Roberto Duran going in there and like beating up light heavyweights as a former welterweight. You know what I mean? I'm talking about guys like Antonio Rogerio Nogueira who go in there and his body is failing him. He's fought 3 times over the course of the past 3 years. He's battled with so many injuries, but he went in there and he was crafty as a motherfucker. He absolutely picked Patrick Cummins apart, and I loved watching every second of it.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I mean, I don't know how that possibly could have gone any better. With that said, I want to point out Patrick Cummins may be the worst defensive fighter in the UFC.
I don't know. Yancy Medeiros was on this card.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That is also a fair point.
Yancy Medeiros had the most aggressive version of Masaru Nduba who has ever stepped into the octagon. And it was a horrible, horrible matchup for him because he doesn't know how to avoid being punched.
That was, man, my God.
This was actually a really fun card overall. I think it was really enjoyable to watch.
It was one of the best cards of the year. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, it cooled down a little bit. The first 2 fights of the main card were not especially exciting. And as much as I enjoyed watching Damian Maia just absolutely sun Matt Brown, that was like a 3-fight stretch that was not terribly scintillating.
Okay, yeah. Santos, Marquardt, Maia, Brown. Well, then there was Barberena Alves. I found that to be interesting. But then there was Shogun versus Anderson. But there is one that we should talk about. How about this? We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about this last fight. I'm speaking, of course, about John Lineker versus Rob Font, and then we'll answer a few questions from you guys at home.
I believe that's John fucking Lineker.
My apologies. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back quickly before we get to our listener questions, Pat. Let's, eat a little crow. We picked another fight incorrectly. This was one of the other ones that I do not, however, think we completely misread this one the way we did Gunnar Nelson and Albert Tumanov. I'm talking, of course, about John fucking Lineker, please excuse my lack of language, versus Rob Font. Rob Font, both you and I expected to be the faster, more mobile, better long-range striker and a better grappler. I think he ended up showing the potential for those things, but we jumped the gun, I think, on our expectation. He's just not ready to do that kind of thing against a guy like John Lineker.
And he may never be the guy to do
That's
those
true.
things.
We underrated just how scary it is to fight John Lineker, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that there are a couple of things to take from that. I think first of all is how good Lineker is at sneaking shots in. That is a guy who never misses an opportunity. He does not. Okay, let me take a step back here. We talk a lot about guys who struggle to pull the trigger, right? That there are situations where you have to just throw. You have to sense the right moment. You have to let your punches go. Lineker is not a guy who has ever had that problem. In fact, Lineker has the opposite issue.
Yes.
Lineker, everything seems like an opportunity for Lineker to land shots. Whether it's a clinch break, whether it's a long range body punch where he has to kind of lean forward to land it. Lineker excels despite not having great footwork, despite not being the fastest guy. He excels at finding ways to land shots. He has an incredible gift for this. Unbelievable gift for it.
That's why I call him. That's why I think of him as a brawler more than anything else. Because the way in which he approaches a fight will often change. He doesn't always pressure. He doesn't always fight off the back foot. But he's always looking to knock your head off. That's his whole thing, is finding the openings to hit you. It's his whole focus.
And it's incredibly crafty the way that he does it because he sees so many openings. They could be openings on the counter. They could be openings while pressuring. They could be to the body. They could be to the head. They could be to the head only after feinting shots to the body. They could be to the body only after feinting shots to the head. They could be on clinch breaks. They could be on the way into the clinch. They could be as after you shoot a takedown and he finds a way to sneak 3 shots in as you're standing back up. Every single thing is an opening for John Lineker to punch you. And that sounds simple, but it's not. Like, think about how many guys you watch and you're like, oh my God, why are you not throwing here? Why are you not throwing here? Why are you not throwing here? To have the ability to see every single opening and to have the mental wherewithal to immediately fill that opening with strikes it's one of the rarest gifts in fighting.
He has the Bas Rutten ethos. You know what I mean? I have a lot of issues with the way that Bas Rutten thinks fighting should be done. But his style worked for him because he was the right kind of guy to use it. And one of Bas's biggest things, no matter what he's talking about, is how much emphasis he places on committing to powerful shots. He thinks Bas had this ridiculous thing a while back where he was talking about how a while back, because obviously we know this isn't true now, but he was talking about how the jab wouldn't work in MMA because it's not powerful enough. Which sounds absurd, but when you look at a guy like Bas Rutten or a guy like John Lineker, you can see where that mentality comes from. Because John Lineker, even when he jabs, and he's got a decent jab when he throws it, it's a power jab. And that's the same thing Bas Rutten didn't say, the jab won't work, and that's that. He said, instead of jabbing, I throw a powerful left. I load my shoulder, and I ramrod that left hand home. And when Bas Rutten talks about his favorite setups, like hitting the left hook to the body and following up with the left hook to the head, he talks about smashing the person in the liver before you try to hit them in the head. Because you have to make them instinctively react to that setup. And that's not the best approach for everybody, especially for people who, care about getting hit in return. But for a guy like John Lineker, it's very scary to have a guy who doesn't really mind being hit, who doesn't seem to mind it at all, in fact, come forward, and he's going to put 100% of his power into every shot he throws. So even if you block them, it's going to knock you off balance and you're going to be hit by the next one. Even if you block them, it's going to hurt. And if you don't block them, it's really going to hurt. And then you have to react. And because he is clever in mixing up his strikes, your reaction will often set you up for another just as powerful shot that lands clean to a now exposed target because you're desperately trying to cover up your body or move in the wrong direction or so on and so forth. It's a very difficult type of style to fight against.
Yeah, exactly. So that means that if you're going to beat John Lineker, you need to be tall. Almost certainly, you need to be tall. You need to have a nice selection of rangy strikes at your disposal, not just a jab, not just kicks. You need to be able to throw all of them. You need to have really tight footwork to be able to move in tight spaces without exposing yourself. You need to feel like the fence is electrified. The second your back hits it, you need to immediately get off. You need to be constantly producing volume. You need to be throwing because Lineker is going to make the most of his opportunities. So that means you need to be scoring whenever he's not able to.
You could make up for these things by being as ballsy as Lineker. But the thing is that Lineker is so durable and so tough that he's the kind of guy you can frustrate, but you can't really scare off. And so you can't just crack him with a counter. And it's like, oh, that took the fire out of your pressure game, didn't it? No, it won't, because he's going to keep coming unless you badly hurt him or you can outmaneuver him. So, it's possible that in a few years, a guy like Cody Garbrandt could have a chance against John Lineker or something like that. But you just need to be incredibly tough or perfectly poised. And so I think we just overestimated how much of those qualities you need to fight John Lineker when we picked Rob Font. I do think, Font, he comported himself well. Lineker's a tough man to fight. Rob Font had a very good second round. He really started to make the adjustments to Lineker. He took the first round shots well, but from the first time that Lineker started to actually hit him, he was a little shook. He was not his usual composed self.
Yeah, I think it's really hard not to be shook fighting John Lineker. And so I think we underestimated the strength of those qualities that you need to have to beat him, and I think we overestimated Font's investment in them.
Sure.
So
I still think Font's a fighter with great potential. I thought.
Oh yeah.
There are certainly fighters who have looked worse against John Lineker, so it's all right. Let's do a few questions before we get out of here.
Go.
Our first question comes to us from Thomas Lindstedt. Ooh, look at that. Did that happen last time we did this too? I have somehow have an auto replay feature on.
I don't know, but I like it.
I just wanted to play the whole time that we're answering the questions. Perfect.
Just make our answers inaudible.
Yeah. All of these, by the way, are Patreon questions. These are all questions from people who have pledged $5 or more to the show on Patreon. So thank you very much, guys. If you want your question guaranteed answered on the show, check out our rewards on Patreon and see what suits your fancy. Our first question comes to us from Thomas Lindstedt, who, first of all, thanks us for talking him into placing a bet on Albert Tumenov over Gunnar Nelson. Don't worry, Thomas, you're not alone. I placed that bet too, and it was not fun to lose. That's one of the ones we read incorrectly. So you're welcome for that. He then asks us about Gunnar Nelson. He says, Nelson seems to be one of those frustrating guys who's either on or off. When he's on, he's a destroyer of worlds and men alike. But when he's not, he looks helpless against guys like Rick Story. Do you think consistency is his main problem? And if he keeps going at it, he can finally be the force that at least I thought he would be coming into the UFC, which I think he means if he works to correct inconsistency. First of all, do you think that is Gunnar Nelson's big problem?
I do not think that's Gunnar Nelson's big problem.
Why not?
I think his problem is process and scoring and putting the various each piece of his game is impressive is more or less impressive in itself. The linkages between those pieces of his game have not been the strongest. So we talked a lot about problems with his takedown entries and having to shoot from too far away, problems with chaining takedowns together, a certain lack of depth to his striking game, a lack of depth in his bag of tricks to work with at range. I think that's his problem. I think against Rick Story, the problem wasn't inconsistency or that his head wasn't in there. The problem was he ran up against a guy who was a really strong wrestler, could stuff his takedowns, was going to work at pace at range, and was tough enough and sharp enough skill-wise to deal with everything that Nelson threw at him, who wasn't going to be shook by Nelson's natural speed, by the power that he naturally possesses. Like, Rick Story doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't care about any of that. Like, Rick Story has been in there with anybody and everybody. When you've been in there with like a 22-year-old Kelvin Gastelum who moves like he shot out of a cannon, when you've been in there with Johnny Hendricks, like Gunnar Nelson is not. When you've been in or like a prime Thiago Alves, like Gunnar Nelson is not intimidating to you.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I think I would say there's an element of inconsistency. I might call it an inherent inconsistency, or perhaps Gunnar Nelson has an incapability of consistency because those linkages are missing in his style. Like he's incapable of putting together a sound process for winning a fight in most cases. Sometimes he's going to have that big advantage in one of those areas, and he can overtake you, or he can dominate you where you are weakest. Other times, because he is very tough and he will keep going even if you hit him, other times he will just out-tough you. But when he runs up against a really well-rounded fighter who can stop his grappling or who can outclass him in grappling, which admittedly no one but Damian Maia is likely to do that in the near future, then that's when you start to realize that there isn't much of a sound process to his game. You start to realize that it's like, okay, if he doesn't have... He's kind of like a super evolved version of Sage Northcutt, right? It's like, okay, Sage Northcutt isn't forcing those... I know that's too much, but...
No, I think my issue is that I think he's the exact opposite of Sage Northcutt.
Really?
Like, I think that they're... Sure, if you look at them as physical specimens, then yes. But I think that Northcutt's game is all transitions. And I think that Nelson's game is very short on the transitions.
That's a good point.
Like Northcutt has very little depth of skill in any particular area. What Northcutt has is a natural understanding of how to go from striking to wrestling, and wrestling to grappling, and grappling to striking. Like, all of those things are very easy for him to do because he's so athletic. Where Nelson is the strange fighter who, despite having elite speed, elite athletic gifts, does not go naturally from one to the other, probably because of the way that he's trained in them, because he was a karate champion, and then he was a BJJ champion, and then he spent a year doing nothing but working on his wrestling.
Yeah.
Like, he has not trained like an MMA native despite having the athletic gifts we would normally associate.
He ends up looking the same or similar to a guy like Northcutt in that both of those styles, whether you're incapable of creating the openings or whether you can't fight without the openings being given to you, if you're stuck in a phase If you're stuck in a single phase that you're not superbly comfortable in, you're not going to look very good. And so when Gunnar Nelson was stuck striking with Rick Story, he didn't look that great. And when Sage Northcutt couldn't force the transitions against Brian Barberena, he didn't look that great either.
Yeah, I think now that's a comparison I'm on board with. But yeah, so as it comes down to inconsistency or not, yeah, it's not like inconsistency as some sort of personality flaw, like his head's not in the fight.
It's not like Verdum, where he'll come in unprepared and out of shape or something.
Yeah, or Melvin Gillard or something, where he's blowing coke, or he's blowing coke 5 days before a fight. Like,
sure,
it's not that kind of inconsistency. So I guess maybe I misunderstood. It's inconsistency in the sense that he does not have a sound, consistent process that's going to work.
Yeah.
The same from fight to fight. Like, he's not maximizing his chances of winning rounds every time he goes out.
Right.
There.
No, I think you understood the question. I was just reinterpreting what consistency could mean within a style.
Yeah, okay, so that's fair. Okay, well, what do we got next? What's our next question here?
Our final question comes to us from Alan Calder, and Alan has a whole long spiel here. I'm going to try to skip through some parts of it because he wrote a lot. He says he finally has a question for us. It's about the Miocic knockout from Saturday. Very topical. You can paraphrase this however you like, he said, which I appreciate. He talks about how Brian Stann was quick to compare the finish in Verdum versus Miocic to the finish in Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin. And Alan, you disagreed. Alan says that he sees all these differences. He thinks a better comparison is Frank Mir versus Todd Duffy. And he has basically all of these little physical differences between the circumstances of the knockout. For example, Anderson had his feet planted and was moving his head, although I would kind of disagree that Anderson had his feet planted when he put that phantom punch on Griffin's chin. He says that both Mir and Miocic took advantage of aggressive forward movement. When they plant their feet, it's on a half step compared to a committed full stride. It's all of this very specific stuff. And so we kind of want to talk about why we think that Brian Stann made that comparison and why, Alan, I think Pat and I both think a few of the things that you're looking at here are maybe you're not focusing on the right things.
I would say the phrase I would use is losing the forest for the trees.
That is absolutely right.
So
go on.
What do all those things have in common? Because I can tell you the characterization of Anderson's knockout as having his feet planted is just fundamental. That's not correct. That's not what happened in that fight.
There's a reason it was compared to the rematch between Ali and Sonny Liston, because it was a punch that didn't look like it should knock a man out.
Yeah, it was a backstepping punch that didn't have Anderson's weight behind it. Whereas all of the others here, except for Mir Miocic, in the Mir Miocic case, in the Mir Duffy case, Mir did stop, plant his feet, and then throw.
Oh yeah.
So I think Stan's comparison was correct. But think about, forget the hand positioning, forget all that shit. They were all backstepping counters. That's the important thing to realize. And backstepping counters can look a lot different depending on the southpaw orthodox, what angle you want to take. They can all look different.
And I think, by the way, that the Mir Duffy knockout is a perfectly fine comparison for the Verdum Miocic knockout as well. They're all good comparisons. But the point is that you have a recklessly advancing opponent coming in. The fighter who scores the knockout steps back to evade the onslaught, often at an angle, and lands a knockout shot. And so Pat and I both love fighting technique, as you can tell if you've listened to the show before, or if you just listened to us rambling about fighting technique for the last hour and 5 minutes. But for me, the most fascinating things, and I think the most valuable things to understand about when you're trying to break down a sequence, the most valuable things to understand are the concepts, the really big core concepts that underline everything. And so I would say that if you look at fights like the Anderson Silva, Stipe Miocic, and Todd Duffy versus Frank Mir, it's not quite as valuable to say, okay, here's all the specific ways that they were perfectly similar. It's more valuable to say, okay, why did these things happen the way they did? Why were these guys knocked out by these punches, whether or not the feet were planted? I would say in two of those, they wouldn't have normally been knockout punches if the opponent wasn't so aggressive. And you can say, why was the opponent so aggressive? And how was the person able to capitalize on that aggression? Did they step straight back? Did they find an angle? Did they enhance that with parrying, or did they move so well they didn't need their hands to block or parry a punch? I think those are the more important things, and I think Pat's little idiom is perfect. Seeing the forest or missing the forest for the trees is kind of what we have here, Alan. I think you've got a great comparison going on between the Mir Duffy knockout and the Miocic Verdum knockout. But the point that Brian Stam was making still stands. You have an over-aggressive opponent, and the guy who knocked him out stepped back at an angle and put his lights out.
Yeah, exactly. There are different ways of creating the specific circumstances that lead to this happening. They were different in every fight.
Aldo McGregor, same thing, very different.
Yeah, there's like the point is think about what all those things share in common. Don't be a lumper, not a splitter.
A lumper.
Yeah, there are two basic kinds of people in the world. Do you want to try and split everything into as many tiny little pieces as possible? Or do you want to try and group things together to understand what makes them go and the different ways that they fit together into categories? Like splitters, there's nothing wrong with being a splitter, but you can go too far into pedantry.
Don't be the guy in the YouTube comments section on like a Metallica video who talks about how Metallica is not real thrash metal because actually they're post 80s, like all of these different fractalizations of musical genre and so on and so forth.
Yeah, don't let everything become so fragmented that your attempts to categorize them lead you off into
right.
another world of specificity.
Right, categories are supposed to help us understand things, and when we over categorize, we lose the meaning of the categories.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your questions, and thank you very much for your contributions. As I said before, if you have questions you want answered on the show, a surefire way to get them on here and get us talking about your topic of choice is to check out Heavy Hands on Patreon. And otherwise, that just about does it for us. Stipe Miocic is the heavyweight champion. It was weird. It was kind of unsatisfying, but OHIO, I'm happy about it being an Ohio man myself. So you people who hate on the Midwest can just go suck it. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to find us on social media, Pat is at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter. I am at BoxingBush, BUSCH. I'm writing for Bloody Elbow and Sherdog.com. Pat writes for Bleacher Report and the Washington Post. Do you want to plug something before we get out of here, Pat?
I'm only doing one piece this week. I'm writing for the Washington Post on Chris Cyborg. Other plug I have, the country of Ohio is in fact fictional. It does not actually exist. Just saying.
You get there, all you do is you take the I-71 through Kentucky, you go through a wardrobe, and then you end up in Ohio.
I was going to say, you stop mentioning fictional places. Kentucky, I-71, this is all an extended lie.
Oh, yeah. Well, would it be really funny if you've been releasing these episodes and it was just you talking with like 5-minute pauses while your imaginary co-host rambles on and no one can hear me?
Yeah, I would not be. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that, but that would in fact be funny. And at this point, given how far my mind has been gone over the last few months, I think that's entirely possible.
A little bit of radio silence there. Okay. Well, I've got the, whatever. I did a piece on Fabricio Werdum. You should go check that out. Just a little short piece prognosticating on his fall. It's called The UFC Heavyweight Curse. Fabricio Werdum loses his cool and his belt. And otherwise, I don't know what else I'm doing. Keep your eyes peeled. We got lots of stuff coming all the time. So thank you for listening to today's episode. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.